Molly Ball, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Governor Whitmer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be with you, Molly.
I want to first get your thoughts on something that's happening not in your state, but in Minnesota, the widespread anger over the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police. What do you think of that situation and how it's being handled?
Well, I think what we know in America is that we have a real issue here. This is a community that is rising up because of the way that George Floyd was treated and killed. In the United States of America, this is a story that has played out many times. Kind of like what we're seeing with COVID-19, there is a real racial disparity in our existence, and this has held up a mirror to us as a country. And so it's, incumbent on every one of us who has a platform to make sure that we use it to ensure that every American is safe and protected under the law. And we have a lot of work to do, as this shows.
What can we do as a nation to end this police violence against African Americans?
There are a lot of things that we can do. We know that having real representation is important. We know that training is incredibly important. We know that getting justice when people are out of bounds or take action like what we have seen in this most recent disturbing video, but we've seen it many times in this country. I think each of these is an important part of the solution, but it also needs to be determined with people of color at the table, devising what actions need to be taken. I think that we've really missed incredible important moments in this country where we should have been taking these actions, and yet here we are once again. And my heart goes out to the family and friends and loved ones of Mr. Floyd.
And I meant to ask you this at the top, but where are you coming to us from? Are you at home? Are you in your office in the Capitol?
I am at the governor's residence in Lansing, Michigan.
Wonderful. Nice decor, nice bookshelves. I like it.
We try. I know I haven't given this much thought to what these bookshelves look like until I did all of these interviews from home. And so
now everybody's inspecting them. Going back to Michigan, you have started the process of gradual reopening, even as obviously the threat of the virus still looms. It's a difficult calculation to try to balance the threat of illness and the importance of people's economic needs. How are you approaching those decisions? What's driving your approach to this process?
Well, first and foremost, staying tethered to the science and the epidemiology and listening to our great leaders when it comes to public health. I am fortunate that every step of the way I've got the counsel of the University of Michigan School of Public Health. I've got the counsel of Dr. Janae Khaldun, who is our Chief Medical Executive here in Michigan. I have been able to stay close to my fellow governors across the country and get the benefit of advice from some of the leading epidemiologists nationwide. And that's what's going to continue to drive all the decisions that I've made. I'm working with the business community to make sure that as we re-engage sectors that we have the proper protocols. I know that people in business understand their business a lot better than state government does, but they're also motivated to make sure that when we re-engage, we stay re-engaged. No one wants to have a workplace that employees don't feel safe coming to, or the general public doesn't feel safe patronizing, and that's why we really are trying to make sure that we get this right. And it's been difficult. Michigan's experience with COVID-19 was harsher than a lot of other states. We, for many weeks, had the third highest number of deaths in our country, even though we're only the 10th largest by population. And so it took very serious steps to make sure that we, flatten the curve, and we have done that. I am concerned that as the weather continues to get nicer in Michigan, and as with the longer this goes, people might think about dropping their guard, and we all want to avoid that second wave. That's one thing I think we're unanimous in.
Yeah, given that some people seem to already be flaunting the guidelines, how can you make sure that people actually do what they're supposed to do while this reopening is underway?
I think it's the challenge, right? We are relying on human beings who are imperfect and are independent and are, have to make their own decisions. And that's precisely why I think it's so critical that everyone with a platform, whether it's at the federal level or the state level, is talking about what the science in it is and is promoting best practices, not mocking mask wearing when we know that wearing masks is what we all need to be doing until we have a vaccine or a cure. And that's months, if not longer, off. And that's part of our challenge here, is to make sure that we stay tethered to the science and that we continue to prevail on people to keep their guard up and to keep practicing these steps that we know will protect us and our families.
And you alluded to some of the inconsistent messaging from the federal level on this. Are you concerned that we're heading toward a polarized situation where Democrats won't leave their homes, Republicans won't wear masks, and the whole thing becomes politicized? Is that where we're heading?
Well, I think unfortunately it has become politicized. And what I am hopeful that we can do is to have people on both sides of the aisle use these platforms to educate the public and to make sure that we keep public health out of partisan conversations. This is about all of our health. This is about our economic health as well. One of the people with whom I've conferred relatively regularly is Governor Mike DeWine. Now, Governor DeWine and I are neighbors. He's from Ohio, I'm from Michigan. We're very different, though. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. We have very different ideas about policy and about what the world, issues that we want to tackle. And yet, he's someone that I've talked to relatively regularly because they're watching the science as closely as we are in Michigan. And the more we can, share information, he gets the benefit of the U of M and I get the benefit of the Cleveland Clinic. We are thinking about things in similar ways, even though we might be tackling them at different cadences. And I think it's important that people see their leaders on both sides of the aisle take this seriously and take actions that we know will protect life.
Over the weekend, your husband was accused of abusing his position as first gentleman to cut the line and get his boat in the water at your vacation home. Do you leaders and their families have a responsibility to set a good example in this regard?
Absolutely. And my husband made an unfortunate and not funny joke suggesting that, would I move up the queue if you knew my wife was the governor? He thought it was funny because at one point I had precluded people from using motorized boating. He thought they would find it funny too. They didn't. I don't find it funny either, and he regrets it a great deal. It wasn't meant as anything other than to find a little humor in this tough situation, and it very clearly fell flat, and I think a good lesson was learned.
Are you surprised that the dock owner, the small business involved, chose to turn this into a public controversy?
It was interesting. They posted something, but they also said he wasn't, he didn't press the issue. It dropped immediately, that he, conducted himself like a good person would. And so I appreciate that. I think right now in this hyper-polarized moment, everyone is looking for fault in one another. And it's unfortunate. I'm hoping that as time goes by, we can get back to a place where we give each other the benefit of the doubt, where we don't seek to find fault with one another immediately, where we try to all rise to the occasion. And that's precisely what I've been trying to implore people of our state to do, and certainly something that is incumbent on all of us.
Your state has been the focus of some of the largest and most intense anti-lockdown protests after your initial emergency order. What was your reaction to those protesters, some of them heavily armed, who came into the legislative chamber?
Well, I think it's unfortunate. It really is a small group of politically motivated individuals. I know that my stay-home order is not universally embraced. I get that. But I also know that when you see this group show up at the Capitol with their Trump float, their Confederate flags, their likenesses of me in a noose, this is a political statement, and it is a political rally, and it is a small group of people. This is a state of almost 10 million people. 1,000 or 2,000 people at the Capitol looks like an immense number on television, and yet the vast majority of people in the state are taking this very seriously. They support the work that we have done here, and they recognize that we have saved lives because of it. And so I am, focused on the fact that our numbers have come down precisely because of the work that we've done. And I'm not going to be bullied into making decisions based on politics when I know public health is at stake and we're talking about people's lives.
Why do you think you've been singled out in this way when so many other governors have taken a similar approach? Do you think that the president has played a role in inciting these protests?
Well, there's no question that the tenor of political discourse in Michigan changed when the president started tweeting about me. It really did. The legislature with whom I'd been working very well, that's Republican controlled, would not extend my stay-home order after that point in time. In fact, they went to court to try to sue me and challenge my executive authority. I won that challenge at the trial court. Of course, they're going to appeal. But I think that the whole tenor changed when the president made it political. And I think that that's an unfortunate thing as you analyze what we have accomplished in terms of the stay-home order and the flattening of the curve and the undeniability that we've saved thousands of lives in this process. And we're now starting to re-engage our economy in a way that is really smart.
You traveled today to the Midland area, the site of the massive flooding in your state, and directed the State Department of Environment to conduct an investigation. Some have alleged that the same Department of Environment contributed to the disaster. Will the investigation be able to look at the state's potential role in what happened? Should there be an independent investigation?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to have the people who understand the issue be the ones that investigate it. We had a failure of one of our energy companies last winter, and it was the Michigan Public Service Commission that needed to investigate it. That's how these things are done and done well. If it appears that we would need to have additional, eyes look at it, that's certainly something that I am open to. But it is the regulation of dams happens in that department, and to ask another to do it that doesn't have that expertise, I think would be not a fruitful endeavor.
Dealing with a natural or quasi-natural disaster on top of a pandemic's obviously a nightmare situation, and one that a lot of other leaders might find themselves in, especially with hurricane season coming up. Do you have any advice for them from your experience with the floods?
I think that with this experience with this flood it was a surreal moment where I was at the State Emergency Operations Center announcing that we were evacuating 10,000 people in the midst of a global pandemic where we're trying to, observe social distancing and face mask wearing and proper hygiene. It is a circumstance I could never have imagined. And I found myself saying that night at the State Emergency Operations Center when I was declaring the emergency, this is unlike anything we've ever seen before, which is the same phrase that I've used many times over the course of the last 10 weeks. It's surreal. And yet we have to continue to do the next right thing. We have to stay focused on the fact that these are people's lives at stake. We've evacuated 10,000 people overnight in the midst of this global pandemic and floodwaters rising, and no one died. It was an incredible feat. And I think that certainly there will be moments where we will need to assess every step along the way. But when you look at it from that perspective, it really is an operation that worked well. We still have a lot of work ahead of us, to be sure. But I think as long as we stay focused on doing the next right thing, we're going to get through this.
I've been thinking a lot about this as we watch, different leaders navigate this differently. What do you feel like people are looking for from their elected leaders? What do you feel like your constituents need from you in this moment?
Well, I do believe that people need calm. They need to know that there is competence, and they need to know that there is hope. These are fundamentals that in a time of crisis are absolutely essential. The consistency of a message that is informed by the best science. We know that we're learning so much about this virus. It is a novel virus. That's the nature of it. There are things we don't know because we've never seen anything like this before. And yet we have to continue to keep the public informed. And that's what I think people are craving in this time where there's so much anxiety of the unknown. People are craving some consistency and calm and competence and hope.
Going back to the president for just a moment, has there been any follow-up from Washington on his recent threat to hold up funding to Michigan over absentee ballots?
So that tweet was fired off about a week ago, and it was unfortunately the same morning that I was flying to Midland, that the first time when I did the aerial assessment of the damage. I spoke with the president that day, later that same day, and he didn't mention anything of that. And so it is my hope that perhaps that was a focus of the moment and not a long-term plan. I also have the fortune of having a great congressional delegation, bipartisan delegation that we've been working closely with, because we need to make sure that we can't let any politics get in the way of our ability to get the resources we need to help people in this time.
You also said last week that you recently had a conversation with Joe Biden's campaign about the possibility of joining the ticket. Has there been any further conversation there? What was that conversation like?
I made one offhand comment, and everyone's read a lot into it. And I certainly wish I would have bitten my tongue. But, I haven't had regular conversations with the campaign throughout. I endorsed Joe Biden before the Michigan primary, which was on March 10th. We have been, close since he came out, and we got to know each other when he helped me get elected back in 2018. And so there are a lot of people working with the campaign that we speak to regularly. With regard to, the potential of a vetting, an initial casual conversation was had, and there's not been anything since.
If you were Joe Biden, would you pick you for the ticket?
You know what? Joe Biden has a phenomenal group of people that could be excellent running mates. And no matter who is on that ticket, I am going to be an enthusiastic supporter here in Michigan. And I am confident he'll be a fantastic president.
Do you support his pledge to put a woman on the ticket?
I think that, that was his pledge, and I think that for a lot of reasons, it's the right thing to do.
Are you willing to predict that Joe Biden will win Michigan in November?
I'm going to work like heck to make sure of it.
Thank you so much, Governor Whitmer, for your time and your insight.